With Alice Cluster quickly coming to a close, I wanted to take some time to highlight some of my favorite decks from it. I'm a really big fan of toolboxes, and being able to have different answers to different situations. There's quite a few archetypes that fall under this category, but my favorite toolbox within the past two clusters has been 12 Apostles. Lore-wise, the Apostles are Lapis' henchmen, and presumably help him conquer worlds or whatever the hell he does, but in the actual game they act as boss monsters within different attributes. There really wasn't an effective way to play Apostles for most of Alice Cluster. Battle for Ataraxia helped change that up a bit, and their continued support in Lapis Cluster only made them stronger. I've been playing Apostles on and off for about a year now, and feel like there's two very distinct builds they benefit from. I want to make this video more of an archetype analysis rather than a decklist showcase, but I'll make sure to include some example lists for any of the variants I talk about in the description. And with that out of the way, let's get into it, because there's honestly way more than 12 of these guys, and there's a lot you can do to support them. Before hopping into our Apostles, let's talk a bit about their corporate CEO, Interdimensional Monarch Gil Lapis. He's a 6/7 shift resonator that searches out an Apostle and Ataraxia Dimension of the Seven Kings from your deck when he enters the field. He can also discard an Apostle to gain an extra 4/4 in precision till the end of turn. He costs 4 will to shift, and when he does, he becomes Space-Time Pursuer Gil Lapis, a 10/10 with precision and the ability to let something else shift for free till the end of turn, or you can bring in an Apostle from your hand with swiftness, but it's removed from the game at the end of the turn. This guy is the glue that holds the deck together, and he can help a lot of plays go off depending on what you need to do. The search ability is obviously very important since it helps you set up your play for the next turn, be it playing a big Apostle or flipping Ataraxia over. He can also do some cheeky things with discarding Apostles to later bring back with Dance of Shadows, End of Days, or Wanderer Valentina. His stats aren't too shabby either, and if you discard something with the Conqueror Lapis side, you retain the boost if you shift that turn. Why he gains precision is beyond me though. I would rather have seen him get something like Flying or First Strike to help him benefit from his temporary boost. Lapis combos well with Lumia since she can save any Apostle he brings in on his shift side by using her Blink ability before it gets removed by Lapis's. Lumia can also bring Lapis to bring him back in on his Conqueror side for even more searches and another Apostle dump on the next turn. Due to this guy's importance to the deck operating, I would suggest running him at 3 or 4. The one other Apostle support card that isn't actually an Apostle is Messenger Familiar. He's a 1-cost 1/1 with the effect to search an Apostle from your deck and add it to your hand when he goes to the grave. I both love and hate this guy. While it's nice to have a searcher for Apostles other than Lapis, I really wish his effect was on Enter instead of when he goes to the grave. Keep in mind, for the same amount of will it takes to play Messenger, you could also be forcing a discard from your opponent's hand or possibly removing something from their field. Also, his stats are pretty terrible. Like, he has wings in his picture, and he's clearly in the air, but he doesn't have flying. You can't give something 1/1 for its stats and then not also back it up with a decent symbol skill. Despite my dislike for him, you should run him at 3 or 4 just so you can keep your searches consistent and have fodder for cards like Adam Brawley, Guinevere, or Resonance of Madness. I kinda want to just skip the bad Apostles, but I feel like I should go over them anyways. Ziz is bad, there's nothing else about it. He has mediocre stats for his cost, and his expensive evolution isn't worth it. Izanami is a deceptively decent card, but she doesn't synergize with the deck at all. Lapis can benefit by discarding her, but her abilities are either way too costly to use from the grave, or rely on a gimmick will type that you won't be running. Her having instant speed discard is nice, but there are much better Darkness 2 cost plays you could be making other than using her. Allosaurus is another resonator like Izanami, where he has an interesting effect, but not one that synergizes super well with the other Apostles. He can play a 3-cost or less fire chant from your remove zone, but that cost restriction is what hinders him in usability. If he could play any fire chant and give you access to Phantom Primogenitor or World Flame Summoning, he might be a bit better. But for now, don't really bother with him in Apostles. Possessor Princess Valentina is pretty bad in this deck for plenty of reasons, the main one being that you can't search her since she's a shift side of a different resonator, Slayer of the Overlord Priscia. You also can't bring her in with Lapis when he shifts, and you also aren't going to be running a lot of reliable green sources for her. Titania does very little for the deck. Apostles don't have room to run, nor do they synergize with fairies at all. Plus, she's outclassed by Nidhogg as a 12/12 flyer. Hades has 0 synergy with anything else in the deck. You're not going to be filling up your standby zone with enough cards to make him affordable, and even then you won't have the fodder to make use of his effects. His only purpose would be to act as a beater, which Behemoth does better. Leviathan is meant to be a game-ending card, but his effect hurts you way more than it helps. Once again, he's outclassed as a beater by Behemoth. I guess if anything, he's fun to bring in against Abdul since you get to keep your hand and still have all of his active abilities. Phoenix is a very gimmicky choice, and one I often skip, but I do think his abilities are pretty strong, and in the past he was a decent one of. When he enters the field, he does 300 damage to your opponent's resonators, so by flashing him with Lumia, you would get a total of 600 damage on board. He wasn't too bad of a choice back when Turbo Gwyber was strong deck, since he could wipe the field of all your opponent's 1-drops and tokens, and then swing into Gwyber to try and kill it. He also has the ability to come back from the grave by paying 2 Firewall when he leaves the field for it. This can combo well with cards that can send him off the field and allow you to sneak in some damage between turns with resonators like Guinevere. Alright, now onto the better apostles you want to be looking at. First up is one of the newest additions to the squad, Valentina the Twilight Passion. She's a 4-cost Fire Darkness Resonator with a multitude of abilities that deal with removing your opponent's cards and making use of them. On enter, she removes a 2-cost or lower Resonator from your opponent's field, and whenever something she does damage to would go to the graveyard, it gets removed instead. She can then send remove cards back to gain Swiftness, Precision, or a 5/5 boost till the end of the turn. This ridiculous amount of removal she brings, it would make her a good candidate to bring in with Shift Lapis. She removes something on enter, gets to swing for another potential removal, and then if you blink her with Lumia at the end of the turn, you get a third potential thing removed. She's also great in matchups against Corrupted Yggdrasil, since she'll do way more damage than they'll have cards left, even if you end up sending things back to their deck to pump her. There's also some tilt potential in there as you do the Zach Galifianakis math on whether you have lethal or not. In a red build she's worth running at 2 simply due to how strong she is, but in anything else I'd leave her at 1. The next stable apostle is Nidhogg. He's a 6-cost 12/12 flyer with one of the better mass removal effects in the game. On enter, he removes all resonators with the lowest cost on your opponent's field from the game. Sometimes you snipe Lancelot, and sometimes you force the Fairy Alice player to scoop and leave. Either way, you get at least 2 mass removals with Lumia, which can sometimes shift the tide back into your favor. Since his remove effect synergizes well with Twilight Passion Val and Blazer the Unemployed Apostle, I like running him at 1, but he's fine at 2 if you want to make him your main boss. Behemoth is the last apostle that I would say is a staple inclusion in any build. He's a 5-cost 15/15 that does damage to your opponent equal to any damage he does to a Resonator when attacking. He's a strong finisher if you need to get in that last bit of damage, and he gets around Abdul since his ability isn't on enter. Adam Brawley the Unfathomable is one of the in-archetype sources of card advantage. In previous builds I would forego running him since you could use Leviathan to sack off your searchers, but with it gone you need another way to do so. In a red build, this guy will get you 2 searches off of Rukgag and Messenger, and in a blue build, he'll give you an extra draw with Little Scout. He also comes in handy when you can't blink an Apostle with Lumia the turn it's flashed in, and set up your graveyard to make use of something like Dance of Shadows or Wanderer Valentina. I'd run him at 2 or 3. Athena is a solid 1-of in a red build, but you don't want to put her into play with Lapis since she has Swiftness already. She's more of an alternative play if you need damage on board or feel like playing Lapis is risky or not worth it. It's harder to make her work in a blue build since your stones aren't going to be set up to play her, and you'd probably be better off running another Adam Brawley instead. The last 3 apostles, Puppet Monarch Valentina, Ouroboros, and Orochi, are all very situational, but I do think they have their places. Monarch Valentina serves a weaker role of the Shift Resonator I talked about earlier. On enter she can take an opponent's Resonator, but they get it back when she leaves the field. In a red build she can grab situational hazards like Arthur, but in a blue build she offers the potential to grab you Adam Brawley fodder. She's an okay 1-of in a blue build, but in red you have plenty of better aggressive options to choose from. Ouroboros feels kind of like Adam Brawley, in that he's more useful now that certain options are gone. In a red build you'll be going through your deck very quickly thanks to all your searchers and cards like Guinevere that give you ridiculous amounts of draw power. I would be careful about bringing this guy in with Lapis though, because you really don't want to blink him, especially after using his initial enter to reset your deck and graveyard. Due to his situational nature, I would say run him at 1, if even at all. Orochi is the last situational Resonator, but one I'm not entirely sold on using. When he enters the field, he does 800 damage to each other Resonator, and whenever he attacks, he hits your opponent for 800 effect damage and does another 800 damage to the board. This guy has a lot of problems, the main one being that he wipes your board when he wipes your opponent's. Keeping Lapis and the other apostles on board is a pretty big deal, but sometimes you don't have a better option against decks that swarm with different kinds of Resonators. He also dies to Unseen Pressure, so that kinda sucks, I guess. I'd say run him at 0 or 1, preferably 0. Well, that's all of them, so let's quickly breeze through the rest of the cards that synergize well with everything and wrap it up. I'm not going to waste too much time talking about your non-apostle Resonators. In general, you want to be running things that reliably search out what you need or give you additional draws. Your early game is actually rather weak, unless you want to forego using those turns to reliably set up to splash in either an aggro or control engine. Red Apostle is the more aggressive deck of the two, and it mixes well with cards like Blazer Dragon since he'll benefit from a lot of the same cards that Valentina will. Blue is a bit slower and runs a few backup strategies based around Wanderer Valentina. You'll constantly be sending things to the grave with Adam Brawley, and you can even pitch Apostles with Lapis to speed up how early you can get her out. An alternative would be run a few copies of Dance of Shadows just in case. Control cards like Abdul are somewhat important depending on what you're against, since they'll force your opponent to spend resources to protect their hand and field and hopefully leave you open to make plays. Speaking of Abdul though, he brings this deck to a complete halt, and you should run something like Dark Purge or Resonance of Madness to deal with him. There's not much else to go on about here. Your Regalia choices are somewhat limited, but Apollo is good to save your Apostles from your opponent's removal, or set them up to be cast again if you blink Lapis instead. Oh yeah, and Hydromatica helps you draw and set up your draws too. I guess you do technically have one other Regalia, which is the Shift Ataraxia that Lapis searches out. I can't ever think of a situation where you actually win off this card's effect, but it does help remove problem cards from the field. Arthur blocking your attacks? Remove him. Death Scythe preventing your last-ditch effort Lumia Flip from swinging? Remove it. Really want to give Valentina precision? Just remove something so she can send it back. If you really do want to go for the win on this card, you'll readily have every color type in your deck ready, except for light. Overall, I think Apostles are one of the more interesting archetypes to come out of Alice Cluster, if not the game as a whole. They have a weak early game, but once they get their momentum going, they become hard to stop. They certainly aren't titans of competitive play, but they have some surprisingly flashy combos when played competently.